All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Path of Purpose. Today, I have my friend here, JT. JT is a health coach and specializes in helping people with Crohn's and colitis heal their gut. Please fill in if I'm missing anything else here.
Yeah, that's the summary. It's basically some version of autoimmune disease, and it's not just focusing on one area. It's kind of the whole picture, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, and kind of finding the connections between everything. Because what heals one person is not going to heal the other.
Mm, yeah. All right, JT, let me ask you then. How did you feel that this was what you're meant to be doing?
So I was always interested in physical stuff and fitness stuff from an early age, and it started with I think it was in fifth or sixth grade. We had only 15 boys in our grade, so it's kind of easy to stand out. And I was usually the second weakest in all the physical activities, or the second slowest. And I just wanted to get a ribbon on those national physical tests they used to give people, the red ribbon or the blue ribbon. If you could do a certain number of push-ups, run a mile in a certain amount of time, and I could never pass any of that. So eventually, I just started doing my own mile runs, doing push-ups and sit-ups every day. And looking back, I was using terrible form, but I was doing something consistently, and I felt better about myself when I was doing that. And then that kind of escalated as I got into high school, and YouTube was just beginning to get big. So I learned from other people like Elliot Hulse, that kind of gave me a background in personal development, but using fitness as the way into that. And kind of lost my way there for a little bit in college. Got more, it says like, oh, I have to get a job, I have to make money. So I went to business school for accounting and finance. Took a little detour to think about physical therapy school, but passed on that, and eventually took a tech job out of college. And that's when things kind of fell apart for me health wise. And I had the first of over 20 surgeries to remove my colon back in 2016, after I had just graduated college and moved to Austin. And for 3 years after that, I was kind of in a limbo state, not really sure what was going on. And I was kind of at the mercy of doctors, but nothing ever got better. So it wasn't until I ran out of medical options that I looked outside the medical field and found people that kind of understood health in a holistic perspective, which is kind of a buzzword nowadays, but they really understood the connecting points. And once I saw all these supposedly impossible things to fix were fixable, it kind of reinvigorated my initial love for health and fitness. But this time I had a clear understanding of what it takes and who to go to for the correct information. And originally, I was just starting out answering people's questions in Facebook's groups that had ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, and then eventually got the bug that I should probably start my own business for this. So even though I've been making good money in the software and tech industry, if I died at that point, I wouldn't have felt like I left an impact or did the things that I wanted to do.
Mm,
So just being able to help people overcome their own autoimmune diseases,
mm.
and through that transform other areas of their life has been really exciting for me, and hopefully help a few people not get their own colons taken out.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. A question comes to mind when you were talking about your story and how there was this moment where you were able to see that there was information outside of what the traditional Western medicine model would consider to be helpful information. When you first learned that, and you were you were made aware of that, this was something that was in your control to be able to heal your own body, was your first reaction to accept that truth, or was there a part of you that that felt like upset that you didn't know that earlier?
I think I went through both phases at one point, but when my health coach, Alex Ripchinsky, said it was people usually change for two reasons. Either they're so inspired by a goal that it outweighs everything else that's holding them down, or what's more common is you hit rock bottom and you have nowhere else to go but up. And the
Mm,
rock bottom was what got me going because I was just in so much pain and I'd run out
mm,
of medical options. It's like, yeah, I'll try anything. I have no idea if eating organic food and doing this other stuff is going to do anything for me, but I'm so desperate right now that I'll give it a shot. So it's kind of an accident that I stumbled into it,
yeah.
but then just doing that every day for 2 months, and I healed something called a perianal abscess, was basically just it was a hole in my butt from an infection, and I'd had that for like 2 years. And within the first 2 months of changing my diet, it healed completely. And
Mm,
oh wow, there's something here. And seeing that
mm,
initial improvement gave me the motivation to do the other things that would take months or years
yeah.
to fix. So
Wow.
I think for everybody, it's going to be a little bit different. Ideally, you don't hit rock bottom, but it can also be a good place to start from since there's no place to go but up.
Yeah. Yeah. For going back to what you said too about the what was that? You said perinatal hole?
They call it a perianal abscess,
Peri.
but it's kind of next to the butthole. It's like a second butthole almost, but it was just a really deep hole that initially I think some nurse in the hospital when I first had my surgeries like was shaving stuff back there and nicked me and then didn't mention it and it developed into an infection. So there was that one dumb little mistake that morphed into something pretty painful for the next 2 years.
Mm,
Um,
wow.
yeah, but I was too weak when I first happened to question those things. Like, oh, the doctors know what they're doing and they're trying everything.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I was anti medical or anti doctor. Like I did everything they said and tried everything.
Mm,
So there could be use cases for it, but just in my situation, it's not
yeah.
what led to my healing.
Mm. So if someone is diagnosed with Crohn's or colitis, actually, could we briefly like talk about the difference? And then I want to get into that too.
Yeah, so the big umbrella is autoimmune disease, and there's a lot of theories around it. It's more just a label. Some people think it's a parasite or fungal infection, or there's a lot of other things to describe it, but just for simplicity, it's an autoimmune disease. And ulcerative colitis is usually only in the colon slash large intestine, or the same thing, whereas
Hmm.
Crohn's can go through the entire GI tract, so from your throat all the way down to your anus.
Mm,
And what's very common with people that have ulcerative colitis is they start with the colon, and then 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they get re-diagnosed with Crohn's because it
mm,
spread to the rest of the gastrointestinal tract.
mm.
And, you know,
So is it then, and like, is it then a like the body's response to inflammation? Is that what that is?
that's one of the common definitions, or the medical definition is usually the immune system is
Hmm.
attacking itself, but there's a lot of factors that play into why it might be attacking itself.
Mm,
So the where I got my information from was from Czech practitioners, and eventually I studied at the Czech Institute. And one of their slogans is, "We don't heal any disease; we just create an environment of health where disease cannot exist."
mm,
And if you're not assessing, you're guessing. So we go through every little detail that makes up part of the body. So it might be
mm,
physical. It might be, the atlas of your spine is off by a couple of degrees, or the vagus nerve has something going on, and that trickles its way down to the GI tract. It might be
mm,
something like that. It could be nutritional, whether the toxicity that we constantly put into our bodies that overrides it. Um, with COVID coming out, there were heavy metals in the vaccines that we learned later on, and the body doesn't know how to process that. It could be emotional stuff where you've been carrying around stuff from childhood that's built up over years or decades. And there's
mm,
just a lot of things that work together. And it's usually not going to be one thing that heals a person. It's usually not, all right, just stop eating bread and you're good. It's
Yeah.
going to be a combination of things. So what seems to have clicked for the people I've worked with is that you have no choice but to transform your life.
Mm.
Whatever area that you feel drawn to, whether it's in a business, whether it's a goal you have to become a professional bodybuilder, a professional actor, like that is just as important to achieving your health goals as eating the right food. And because our body is a connected system, we can't isolate anything. Whereas when we go to the doctor, everybody has their specialties. The primary care doctor does his or her thing. The surgeon looks at their one area, another doctor, a specialist looks at that one area, and everything's in isolation,
Mm.
but nobody really pieces everything together.
Mm.
And I think that's what's led to the biggest change for me and for everybody I've seen that's healed their specific issues. It's
Yeah.
focusing on the whole. Um, and,
Mm.
knowing you, I know you've taken kind of that perspective as well.
Yeah. So then how think I'm thinking of like a person that has like just diagnosed with like Crohn's or colitis. If they're hearing like just transform your life, like that seems like overwhelming. Like
Yeah.
what do you tell someone who is just diagnosed with that and they're like freaking out? Like what do you say?
Freaking out is the normal response to that. And I think a lot of it's going to be where that person is right now is where we start. So someone who has never had any interest in personal development or health or anything like that, it might be all right. Let's just start with drinking water every day. We're going to replace the coffee and the soft drinks
Hmm.
with water, and that's all we're going to do. It's like, yeah,
Mm.
there's a lot of other important things that we need to do eventually, but we need to get your body or mind at least in a foundationally stronger place before we can do some of the more difficult things. But I think the person themselves eventually has to feel themselves and see, where am I most drawn to? What do I feel is the most important thing for me to work on? Because we don't want to be paying a doctor or a health coach for the rest of our lives. We eventually have to be our own doctor in many ways. Um, but another person who's maybe been very successful in one area of their life, maybe they're very wealthy, they might already have some of those traits to flip the switch kind of quickly, and we can give those people more things at once, and they might get healthier faster than the other person, but neither one is the wrong path. It's
Mm.
just where that person is in their life and kind of letting them guide their health journey in some ways. Because, like you said, it can be overwhelming and we don't want to do too many things at
Yeah.
once.
So then if someone comes to you then and they're like, "Hey, like I have ulcerative colitis, what do I do?" And like cuz if that person is like freaking out, right? And they're hearing someone say like, "Oh, like you need to figure it out." Like what's like a practical first step, that they can take in order to stop freaking out and worrying?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of good free information out there from various people. And I post on my social media, but there's other groups like Crohn's and Colitis Lifestyle. There's a bunch of Facebook groups where you can search for your specific situation, find somebody that resonates with you, and start there. For people that I work with, we usually start off with an assessment. So it's just a multiple choice, but it takes about 20 minutes to complete. But we get a pretty detailed picture of where are the most important areas to work on.
Mm.
So it'll give us the score for the GI tract, for the muscular skeletal tract, for the mood, for the
Yeah.
brain, for male and female specific things. And then we can see, all right, here's what the, I guess, survey is telling us is the most important for you to work on. What do you feel? And here are the steps that we can take to address that. What do
Hmm.
you feel you're capable of doing right now? What's a good amount of change for you right now?
Hmm.
And then letting the person kind of pick where they want to start.
Hmm.
But a common denominator I've seen in anybody that's made changes or has eventually gone healthy is that they've taken some sort of personal responsibility for it. It's like, all right, I didn't do this on purpose, but something is off here. I don't believe disease is the natural state for a human being. And I'm not a fixed entity. I can make improvements. I can change things, or I'm going to have
Yeah.
some level of optimism. So I think that's a very important baseline to start with.
Yeah. So then depending on like what their score is then like what would be like those practical measures that they take.
Yeah, for almost everybody, it's going to be some type of nutritional upgrade. So for a lot of people, I start them with, or they've started on something called the specific carb diet,
Hmm.
SCD, and that was created by a lady named Elaine Gottsville. I can't pronounce her last name, but she had a daughter with colitis, I think. And the entire diet is based on eating foods like the molecules are only one molecule. So the body has to do less work and less effort to break that down. Whereas a lot of foods, when you break it down, it's got multiple molecules together.
Yeah.
So it's just extra steps for the GI tract to absorb it. So that's one thing. And then,
What are some of those foods?
so for like sugars and carbs, the only thing that was allowed on it was honey and uh, most fruits.
Hmm.
Those are usually the simple carbs that are easier for the body to break down. Meat is usually where most people get their nutrition from. And then something that she doesn't mention in her books or her website, um, both of which are called breaking the vicious cycle, is the quality
Hmm.
of that food. So
Yeah.
for eating organic, making sure everything's grass fed if you can afford it, or at least making sure you can get a little bit above what the
Yeah.
standard stuff is.
Hmm. So if I'm hearing you correctly, most of the time it's like if someone is like freaking out and they're like, "Oh my God, like I have Crohn's, like what do I eat? My neck, like I'm hungry. What do I eat?" So would you say it's some sort of combination of like the highest quality that you can afford slash source of meat and fruit?
Yeah, that's a good summary of it. It's yeah. Then once the body's a little more foundationally strong, then we can work on some of the more difficult things. Like we're not gonna,
Hmm.
for somebody who's freaking out right now, we're gonna not gonna talk about their spirituality or their
Yeah.
relationship with their parents. That might be a little
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
But
So in terms of like vegetables, then are you like just like is that grouped in with fruit, or is that like something later down the line that you'd implement?
for the majority of people, it's going to come later. I think I have to look back at the website, but I think there might be some vegetables that are allowed when you boil it and make it like
Hmm.
extra soft.
Yeah.
Me personally, I can't do well with fiber and skins, and that's kind of common with people that have GI tract issues.
Hmm.
So I tend to avoid it, but yeah, that's kind of where the art form comes in, and everybody's a little bit different. So it's
Yeah.
important to not be dogmatic and say you have to eat this way, and
Yeah.
everybody does the same thing.
Mm. Yeah.
Cultivating
Yeah.
that personal relationship and seeing what works for you.
Yeah. Are there like specific like supplements or something that are like you would you would say like this is, or like I would say instead of you saying giving advice, but like what supplements would you take if you were in that position?
Yeah, there are some that could apply to unique situations, but one that's going to work for everybody, or even if it's not for them, it's not going to do any harm, is digestive enzymes. So
Hmm.
if you're in that state, your GI tract's probably not functioning the right way, and it's going to be harder to break down foods. So usually need some
Hmm.
support to do that. So the best brand that I've seen is from Bioptimizers. It's called Masszymes.
Hmm.
So I've met one of the owners before, and the health coaches I work with, they've been to their factory, so they know that it's a clean process and it's people that understand
Yeah.
health holistically, and that seems to be the best one.
Mm.
But there's other things individuals can take, like stomach acid, but people who don't need that are going to feel worse on it.
Yeah.
So if you want to experiment with different things, you can, but digestive enzymes are going to be a big
Yeah.
one.
Mm.
And I think for most people, there's going to be a parasite or fungal infection as well.
Hmm.
I think like 80% of the population was one stat from some government agency of
Mm.
how many people have a parasite infection at one time.
Wow.
Even if you're a healthy person that's just kind of living on Earth, you're going to have stuff that's in you.
Yeah.
So that can kind of give the body a chance to reset. And there's various detox protocols you can follow for that. Dr. Kaufman,
Hmm.
Kaufman, has a bunch around that.
Yeah.
But
What do those look like? Because like I feel like someone hears like parasite fungal infection, they're like their
yeah,
eyes light up and they're like, what do I do? You know, like is
right.
that something that like I should be worried about?
Yeah, I just actually gave it to somebody 2 weeks ago, and they were kind of freaking out about it because they thought a detox is this some big thing that you have to change everything about your
Yeah.
life to do it properly. But for the one I gave her, it was from internalcleanse.com, and it was just a powder you add to your drink, and then a couple of probiotic pills. And then at nighttime, you take a tea that kind of flushes out your intestinal tract.
Yeah.
So it's not too intense, but it gives you a chance to get the body back to ground zero.
Yeah.
And then
Hmm.
based on the results of that cleanse, if you're working with somebody, there's different things you can do afterwards, like a heavy metal detox, um, or a liver detox is common, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of different ways that it can be branched out.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Is that something then that, like if someone is coming to you and they have Crohn's or colitis, is that something that you're starting with them right away? Like with the diet?
it usually is if they're open to it. If it's too much for them, or I get the sense that, we just need to do one thing at a time,
Hmm.
then the diet by itself might be very helpful.
Yeah.
Uh, but I find for a lot of people, it's change is, I mean, for all of us, it can be difficult. So some type of breathing practice or meditative practice is a simple tool that can help with those changes. So if you're
Hmm.
upgrading the types of food you're eating, that might bring things up in you, or you don't want to do it for whatever reason, or you feel drawn to go get the McDonald's food or the Chick-fil-A. Just being aware of what's going on in the body,
Mm.
like you and I did before the call, just
Yeah.
feeling the sensations in the body and just not trying to fight it, feel it fully. That can kind of ease the tension or if you want to call it an addiction to whatever you're craving,
Mm.
and kind of reset the mind to then eat the healthier food or whatever
Mm.
change you have to make.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point. What does, because I think a lot of like eating too is like, especially in our society, is like, I want what's tasty. I want what's gonna like, I can just stuff my face and like what does intuitive eating look like?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and something that I think is important to call out is that initially it's probably not going to taste good, and initially you're probably going to feel worse, which is a good sign, and it's very common. If you're feeling worse when you start eating good food, it's the body can finally detox and pull the crap out of the organs and the fat cells that it's been
Mm.
storing. If you've ever gone on a vacation or had a break after being
Is
stressed.
this someone who's like really poor health that you would say that would feel crap at first? Because like
uh,
I feel like if I eat good foods, I feel like way better and more energized than if like I eat like garbage. Like if I eat something that's like super greasy or like super high in carbs, like I'll feel tired after.
yeah, it's usually when you're feeling sicker. Someone who hasn't had any diseases and they start eating healthy, they might notice the benefits right away. I know for me, after 3 years of surgeries and antibiotics, all that stuff, when I first switched up my diet, I couldn't stand for more than 10 minutes without feeling
Mm.
like I was going to pass out. That lasted for about 2, 3 weeks, and I was just feeling terrible. But I had people coaching me. I was like, no, this is normal. This is good. Your body's just getting rid of all this crap. So your crappy
Yeah.
feeling is a good sign. And after that initial period, then when I ate the real food, it's like, oh, I can feel the energy. I feel
Mm,
better doing this.
yeah.
So, yeah, that's a individual basis, I guess.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to that point on intuitive eating. Like what does it look like to eat in a way where you are nurturing your body rather than like acting out of a desire or
Yeah.
something like along that lines?
Especially for people that have tried diets before, whether it's weight loss or weight gain or any type of bodybuilding, anything like that, there's usually a focus on macros. How many grams of protein, carbs, fats do I eat? How many calories do I need to eat? And when we're just trying to get the body healthy and give it what it needs, none of that really matters at this time. Once you
Mm,
get healthy and you have a specific goal, maybe that can come back into play. But initially, it's just paying attention to before we're eating, what do I feel like? Am I actually hungry or am I stressed out because of something at work? And this is
yeah.
my go to stuff down that feeling. While
Mm,
I'm eating, how do I feel eating this steak? Or how do I feel eating this Chick-fil-A sandwich? And then an hour later, how do I feel now? Did my energy drop? Did my energy go up? And I think just awareness of how the body's feeling and not trying to suppress anything is what makes those changes easier. I think it was Dr. Joe Dispenza where I heard this from on some podcast where he was saying awareness is what really creates change. So the first time you're aware of something, it's not going to change anything. You'll feel
mm,
it, and then you'll want to go back to eating the Chick-fil-A sandwich. The
yeah.
20th time you feel it, all right, I'm aware of it, but I still want to go eat that sandwich. And
Mm,
then the 101st time you feel it, there's no craving for that sandwich. You've
yeah.
let that feeling process in the body fully, and whatever was drawing you to it kind of dissipated on its own. You didn't need to use willpower, discipline, or shame yourself into
Yeah.
eating a certain way. You just naturally got towards it. So I feel like at our default, we don't crave these things. They've only been around for the past,
Mm,
100 years. So it's not like it's in our DNA to want these.
yeah. What about speed of which we eat? Like the speed of which we eat and yeah, yeah, the speed of which we eat.
Yeah,
And
there's a
and
lot of,
chewing our food. Something, yeah. Like what do you think about that?
yeah. Paul Chek's got a saying that you chew your liquids and drink your food. Basically, meaning you spend a lot of time chewing it to make sure that it's easily digestible. And for liquids,
Mm,
you're not just chugging it down the hatch. There's a lot of gritty science that we could go into, but like for liquids, just swishing it around your mouth for a little bit before you swallow. The saliva, when it gets to the stomach, helps the body absorb it. So
mm,
that's a little tip. And then, if we're eating food while we're watching the news and they're just pounding fearful stuff into you, well, your body's going to be more in a fight or flight state and it's not going to be
yeah.
able to process that food well.
Mm,
So if I have to watch something, I'll usually watch something funny or just a sports game I don't care about. So there's no emotions or
yeah.
going outside. I found and just being in the grass or on my back patio is helpful. Um, and then when we choose to drink water has a big impact on, or choose to drink liquids has a big impact on the timing of food digestion. So usually drinking water about 20 to 30 minutes before we eat gives the lining of the stomach and the intestines a chance to expand and fill out. Um, Leaky gut syndrome is pretty common nowadays, and one of the causes of that is we drink with our meals or drink too quickly before our
Mm,
meals, and it dilutes the stomach acid and the mucosal lining of our intestines and our stomach hasn't absorbed the water properly. So food particles can go where they're not supposed to go.
yeah. That's another really interesting point you bring up that I want to talk about too. Um, What is leaky gut?
That one I haven't dived too much into the specifics of, but the it's basically the intestine is and the stomach is allowing things through areas that it shouldn't be going into.
Hmm.
So, like when I had my colon issues, there was a perforation. Basically, there was a hole in it, and there was bacteria in the colon, specifically E. coli bacteria, that was getting into the rest of my system that it wasn't supposed to be there, and it was wreaking havoc.
Mm.
So it's basically weakening various areas of the body, and things are passing through that they're not supposed to pass through and going to different areas. Um, but when we have that, it's usually a pretty easy fix of just nutrition or food timing, water timing, and making sure that we're
Hmm.
eating the right amount of food.
Yeah. What are the what are the optimal eating timings and drinking timings? Yeah, I know you mentioned drinking 20 minutes before a meal, but like in terms of eating of like schedule.
Yeah, there's a lot of school of thoughts on that, and every influencer online's got their own nutrition program that they follow. So I think a lot of that depends on every individual's lifestyle and what they want. For some people, not eating in the mornings is very helpful for their life, or for some people,
Mm.
not eating in the afternoons or some type of fasting is very helpful for them. I've tried both versions, and neither one was good for me. I need consistent food throughout the day. And really, the only hard and fast rule is to try not to eat within 2 hours of going to bed,
Mhm.
since it gives the body time to digest it. So it's not just sitting in your stomach while you sleep.
Yeah,
But other than that, it's a lot
interesting.
of just individual lifestyle and just what feels good to you. And that might change
Hmm.
throughout your life. But
Yeah.
I know you've tried various forms of that. Is there anything you're currently doing?
Yeah. Currently I'm doing like Monday through Friday, I'll do like two meals. Usually like today I had my first meal at probably 11:30, and then I'll have another meal probably maybe at like 5.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and I feel like uh, it feels good for me, and I feel like that way it allows me to have more energy in the morning.
Yeah.
Um, and then on the weekends, like if I'm out with people, like I won't be as strict on myself of like only two meals, because if I'm eating my meals at 11 and 4 p.m., like I can't really eat with anyone. Like typically I'm eating alone. So yeah, but that's been helpful, and yeah, I think also just like yeah, the amount too. I think the amount is important of how much, and like trying to eat a little bit lighter meals before I go to bed, or like if I eat late, if I come back after jujitsu and it's late, to not like have that be my biggest meal of the day, like an hour before I go to bed. But
Do you find it has an
yeah.
impact on when you're doing jujitsu or lifting weights? If you've had stuff to eat beforehand or skipped meals, how do you feel when you're
Um
doing that?
yeah, I don't like to do anything fasted. Like that's for me, like I've done that, and I just like I don't like it. And like I don't like to work out like immediately after a meal, or I would say even like 2 hours. Like after 2 hours, that's when I'd want to work out.
Yeah.
Just because like doing anything on a full stomach, it feels like my body's trying to do like two things at once almost.
That seems to be the sweet spot for me too. Is 2 hours after eating is when I feel good to work
Yeah,
out. It's enough time to
yeah,
digest and get the energy in the system.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I would. Yeah, that's an interesting
I think
thing to
the only
think
time I can
about.
really work out without food is very early in the morning while the
Yeah,
cortisol levels are naturally rising. So once I get past like 8 a.m., like I need to have something to eat before I
yeah,
can do something physical.
yeah. Interesting. Yeah, like today, like I woke up and like I didn't even feel an urge to eat until like 10 or 11. But that's interesting how it can be different.
Yeah. I went a little too
Um,
far off that and at various points of not eating, because once I learned that I could go long periods of time without food, And that is
Yeah.
even healthy sometimes to give the body a break from eating. And then through just various hospital stays and taking camping trips, I was like, oh, I don't really need food. So
Mhm.
I would just skip meals, even though I was kind of hungry because
Yeah.
mentally I knew I didn't need food. So I've kind of had to come back to that recently and make sure that I'm consistently eating so I have the proper
Yeah.
blood sugar levels and can do my work properly.
Yeah. Wow. I think I have the opposite problem of like just wanting to eat all the time. And like I feel like that's like especially like sometimes it's a problem if I'm like at like family gatherings or something and it's like, like you go to someone's house and it's like, oh, they have food out and then they have dinner. It's like I'm just like grazing like a freaking cow. And it's just like I feel like shit and I get tired at like really early in the day.
Right. If you're living good the rest of your life, you can get away with those things for special occasions.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
really, you can still
Yeah,
enjoy life.
special occasions is the key word.
Right.
In
Every
terms of
Tuesdays.
like what are like the causes for like leaky gut? Like what causes someone to have leaky gut? And also is that maybe a could that be like a precursor for some of the other conditions like Crohn's and colitis?
It definitely could be. It could be one of the first warning signs, and our body usually gives us warning signs before it gets to the disease state, whether we can feel it or not, or listen to
Yeah.
the signs of the different story. But for leaky gut, Crohn's, colitis, for most diseases, there's a lot of similarities for where we start off. It's
Hmm.
doing the nutritional basics, it's doing the proper detoxes, and then if the person's in a place where they can handle it, looking
Yeah.
at more of the stresses that are going on. And it's not just emotional stress, it could be environmental stress. What's
Hmm.
in the water that we shower with? Is there a Wi Fi tower that's next to our house? Was our house built on an old trash site?
Yeah.
And there's like place I live, I think used to be near a trash site, and when it rains, you can smell the sewage water coming
Mm.
out. So I know that's not a great sign that I'm living here. But there's a lot of different things to look at. There's a picture I have. I know. Do you show video for your podcasts?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, you should be able to share. Are you able to share your screen?
Yeah, I can do that. I think
Yeah, cool.
rather than me having to
Yeah.
explain everything, this might be easier.
Yeah, there's the little share button.
Yeah, it's from the Czech Institute. It kind of brings together the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, and how just because you have an issue with leaky gut or in the colon doesn't mean it's just an issue there. Uh, there it is. Let's see, can I make that bigger? This is something that Paul came up with that looks at every part of the body holistically. So if we look at more of the leaky gut area in the colon, it has some physical nutritional stuff, like if there's pressure in the body cavities, or if peristalsis is doing the right things. And peristalsis is the pumping of the intestines to get poop out of the system.
Mm.
That's why things like Miralax taken long term are harmful because it trains the body to stop peristalsis.
Mm.
Just like taking
Interesting.
TRT trains the body not to make testosterone.
Yeah.
So similar to that.
Wow.
So it's not just that. Even though a holistic doctor might just look at that, we can see this person's body physically, what they look like before, different postural things versus what they look like after. And then when you move to the left, there's different things to look at, whether it's digestion or muscles, what part of the spine is affected. So a manual therapist could work on that. And then, if anyone's familiar with the Eastern medicine or Indian way of looking at things, the chakra system, every part of the body, I guess emotional levels is a way of phrasing that. So for that area of the body, that would be the third chakra. So we might look at personal power and self will. Fear and grief are common things.
Yeah.
And then there's a bunch of other little things over here. So it's looking at all of these things combined to really figure out where the issue is coming from. And we might
Mm.
not see the root issues right away. It's like peeling an onion. Once you
Yeah.
fix the first thing, all right, I started eating healthy, and then another issue popped up. I was like, wait, I thought I was getting healthier. Well, you are, but we got to the next level, a deeper level that we couldn't
Yeah.
see until you fixed the first issue.
Mm. So if someone is coming to you, then when do you start to dig into some of the less obvious things? Like if someone's coming to you and they're like, oh, I have Crohn's and colitis, and like it's like the first time they're there and they're talking about like emotional trauma, like when they were a kid, like that might not be a conversation that they want to have or willing to have like the first time, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's still something that I'm working on after being introduced to this 4 or 5 years ago. It's not something that came as easy to me as going to the gym or switching the way that I ate. But there are other people that it comes very naturally to. I mean, my girlfriend, she can make emotional changes like that, but
Mm.
nutritional changes it takes a lot longer. Whereas I'm the
Yeah.
opposite in that area.
Mm.
So it's going to depend on the person, but if there's an area that really jumps out, I might give little suggestions every time. I'm not going to force you to talk about your relationship
Yeah.
with your mom, but I can clearly see, like, if a person has throughout their life, they have a bunch of injuries on the left hand side of their body, that's often associated with mother issues, and the right side's often father issues.
Mm.
So that's just one thing to look at. If I keep seeing these things and they're not getting better, keep dropping hints or knowing that's kind of the art form of when to kind of
Uh,
push the person to
yeah.
dive into that. But
that concept
ultimately,
of that concept of left and right side, that is like, I feel like from what we typically know to be true about medicine and health, like would you doesn't that seem like a little far out of a concept?
it definitely does. And I didn't really believe it for like the first 2 or 3 years that I started getting healthier. Um, for me, it wasn't until I got my nutrition dialed in and my body wasn't in pain anymore, physical pain, that I could open myself up to seeing, this is interesting. Let me explore
Mm.
more about this. Or my mind was less rigid to other concepts because I had tried something nutritionally. It's like, oh, there was benefits here. And
Yeah.
then it's kind of baby stepping into different things, but there's nothing anybody has to do. It's,
Mm.
do they feel like this is something I want to work on? And if not, that's cool too. There's a lot of ways to do it. Just like working out, you don't have to go to the gym. You
Yeah.
could play sports, you could stack rocks, you could do yoga. There's a million different ways to
Mm.
get to where you need to go.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
But that was, I've explained it like when I was talking to my parents about that when I was getting healthy. Like, oh yeah, I've got a lot of right side issues, Dad. Can we talk about some things? And that conversation didn't go very far because he had thought I was kind of out there, like you mentioned.
Because of the way that you're talking about that concept.
Yeah, the way I communicated it probably wasn't the best way. I mean, it was emotionally charged for me trying to even bring that up.
Yeah.
So communication,
On top of already trying to communicate a concept that is like hard to grasp as well.
right? Yeah. So that's something I've had to really work on. Nonviolent communications, a little short book that I think is the best way to get started on that. It's you can finish it in an hour, but he explains it like he's talking to a 5 year old, and it's kind of how to explain concepts gently to people, whether it's your friend, your partner, your parents,
Yeah.
or somebody at work. Um, yeah, once we can kind of take that charge away, and I used to be pretty terrible at it. I've gotten a little bit better at it. Once we
Mm.
take the emotional charge out of it, and people see they're not being personally attacked,
Yeah.
think most people are pretty open to at least having a conversation about different things, even if they don't believe it to be true.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of a balancing act.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, because you can have a conversation with something without necessarily adopting it. Like you can adopt it to be true for the sake of the conversation, but you don't need to like
Yeah.
adopt it into like your core values, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've all got
But
different
still,
views.
I'm still fascinated. How can that, like, how did someone come to that? Like, how did that come into like fruition almost? How did that concept come into like, oh, yes, yeah, you know? Like, because if someone comes up to me and like punches me on the left side of my face, like, am I
Right.
going to say that that's because like I have emotional trauma from like my maternal figure?
Right. No, that's a good point. You don't want to be a nut job about it. And that's kind of looking at everything together. So just because, like you said, you've got an injury on the left side doesn't mean it was because your mom said things to you when you're 6 years old.
Yeah.
It's just one more data point that we can look at to try and
Got it.
figure
Okay.
out the riddle.
So more like more general, like looking at it as like a general, if it's a general theme.
Right. Yeah. So we might try
Okay.
things around that, or maybe that's probably not going to be the first thing we start with. And maybe
Yeah.
once we do nutritional stuff and detoxification protocols and physically get the body right, it might go away.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, cool. It wasn't an emotional issue.
Yeah.
But if we do all those basics and there's still lingering issues, it might be time to look at things that might seem more out there
Yeah.
and see what happens.
Mm. Yeah. Interesting.
So I
Super
don't
fascinating.
know. It is. I think it's not having a fixed mindset is one of the most important things for having discussions around things or whether you make change or not. It's just operating with a
Yeah.
mentality that maybe I don't know everything. Maybe there are other people I can learn from.
Yeah.
Whereas more in the medical system, you get a diagnosis if X, then Y. If you've got these
Yeah.
symptoms, we do this surgery or this medication. And
Yeah.
there's not a lot of, all right, we've got new data, let's try this. Oh, that didn't work, but this worked. All right, let's take that information and try this now. And it just
Yeah.
keeps going and going and going until eventually you figure it out.
Mm. Yeah. It's almost like it loses the art form of it because it's like our health is our health really is like, yes, medicine is a science, but it's like it's more than a science. It's more than just a science. Like it's also there's different variables that are uh that are complex, and it's yeah.
Absolutely. And it's not like we're throwing science under the bus. Like
Yeah.
modern medicine is a miracle in many ways. Like ER doctors are literally miracle workers when somebody
Yeah.
comes in and they're dying right now and they got to save them. Like
Yeah.
antibiotics have a lot of phenomenal use cases that have kept people alive.
Mm.
I think that the pendulum kind of swings back and forth, it feels like, throughout history. Right now, we're a
Yeah.
little too far on the science and technology side.
Mm.
But when we can combine the two, that's when the person has, I think, the best chance of
Yeah.
healing their
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And like to be able to have the most amount of tools to like to go about fixing something.
You know? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, it
And
gets, yeah.
go ahead.
No, it's just a lot of people get charged when we're talking about these different things. Someone who's more modern medicine oriented is going to get upset when they hear somebody talk about nutrition, but somebody who's more on the
Mm.
holistic side of things might get upset if someone's talking about you need to go see this doctor for X. Like, well,
Yeah.
there's depending on the person, there's probably going to be reasons to do both.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. But then you see the people that are informed in both ways, and they really stick out.
They do, and it's almost like they've. Uh, Out of my personal experience, seeing the people that around me, and I feel like you're one of them that kind of have a more balanced perspective. It comes usually from a painful event in life or intentionally choosing to work on certain things consistently
Yeah.
and not just giving into. our addictions or doing what we've always done.
Mm,
It's just choosing to live a different way. It
mm,
doesn't mean everybody lives the same way. That's kind of the beauty of talking to different people and working with different modalities. You get to hear everybody's perspective, and then
mm.
we each get to decide what's the right thing for our life and the right thing for our individual goals.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think about this quote too from it's a Jung quote, and like Jung wasn't a doctor, but he was a therapist, and or I think he was actually a psychiatrist too. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But anyway, he has this quote about like um it's like something along the lines of when you're being a therapist and you encounter like another soul, to like just be another soul with them rather than trying to harness a specific technique. And like what stuck out to me about that quote here, I'm gonna try to find it because it's
Yeah, instead of kind of telling somebody do this, it's kind of just seeing what we each come up with.
yeah, 1 second. I think it's right here. Yes, here we go. It says to decide when to apply the one or the other method rests with the analyst's skill and experience. Practical medicine is and always has been an art, and the same is true of practical analysis. True art is creation, and creation is beyond all theories. That is why I say to any beginner, learn your theories as well as you can, but put them aside when you touch the miracle of the living soul. And yeah, it's like this concept of like whether you're health coach or whether you're a doctor or a therapist, it's understanding that there's things that transcend all of like what we've created in our own logic. And like for like medicine and healing, what this is like getting at for my interpretation of like our conversation, and like especially the last part um about like how like traumas in your childhood can affect it. It's like there are things that we need to reconcile in ourselves that might be outside of is just um what is just like a theory.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm trying to like I'm still like trying to think that part out, but yeah.
It's
Yeah,
not
and
exact.
yeah, go ahead.
It's not exactly the same metaphor, but it sounds like an athlete who practices the same skill over and over again. But then they get into the game. LeBron isn't thinking about tucking his elbow in while he's shooting the ball. It's just he's playing the game at that point.
Yeah.
It's kind of we're
Yeah,
playing the game
that's a
with the other
much
person.
simpler way of saying it. But yeah, yeah, yeah. I think absolutely. And I think they're going back to what you said, and like that example with your dad, there is an art in like, there's an important part of like listening to how somebody is communicating to you, whether it's like what they're telling you or what the nonverbal cues are, to be able to tell them for the information to be able to land with them.
Absolutely. Well, with the people you've interviewed, since everybody's trying, they have their own way of empowerment or what they're drawn to. Have you seen any similar threads around this topic?
In terms of people that are doing the work that they feel called to do, I guess a similar theme would be, well, money is not their first motivation. That's like common theme with everyone.
Mhm.
Like maybe like that, yeah. Maybe it's important to them, but like it's not the primary motivation of why they're pursuing what they're pursuing. I think that's one. I think another part too is there's this just theme of, this sounds like kind of Freudian, but like this there's a theme that goes back to people's childhood of like what like an interest in their childhood or something that happened in their childhood that made them that made what they're doing so close to it's so close to who they are. You know, it's not just a means to an end. Like it's like almost an expression of their sense of self. And so I would say those are two, like I could talk about this forever. Like I like this part is so fascinating for me. But I would say those are the two big ones that come to mind. Um, and also like on this topic too, Mastery by Robert Greene. Have you heard of that book?
I've heard of it. I've been meaning to buy it for like 10 years, but I've never officially read
Well,
it.
consider this your sign to buy it. It's I like he is such a phenomenal researcher. Have you read any of his other books?
I haven't read it, but I follow him and his protege Ryan Holiday on social
Okay.
media, so I'm very
Yeah.
familiar with his work. I just haven't officially read his books.
Okay. Yeah. So the way his books are structured, and for those of you who are listening, he's written Mastery, the 48 Laws of Power, which has been banned from like so many prisons, which is like wild. He wrote The Art of Seduction and a few other books. And the way of which his like he writes these books is it's like essentially qualitative research and like looking at the lives of people who are for in this case mastery, people who are the masters of uh, of their field or their craft. For instance, like Albert Einstein, Charles Darwin, um, and all these different people, and like looking at their lives and at like looking at how they became what they were. And um, so I guess what I'm trying to say is like this is kind of it's kind of related to what we're talking about of how no, it's directly related to how people like find their purpose and their calling in their work. And um yeah, he does a much better job of like really qualitatively going in and like looking at these things. And like also like while reading it, it's like it's almost impossible to not make relations to our own lives and to hear things that people have done in their life and say like and looking at it internally through our own life and seeing how we can apply it to like uh our life. And for instance, like I know, tell me if I'm talking too much, but you asked a question.
No, this is great.
This is
I like
what this is what happens when my guest asks a question.
it.
When I get the talking stick. But um, like I was listening to his book. Like I love to listen to audiobooks. Like that's I don't like to I do read and I read for school, but like I prefer to listen. And I was listening to his book and um like it just inspired me to start the podcast up again. Like I was like listening is a core theme in a lot of the work that I do, whether it's in my consulting work or whether it's as a death doula or whether uh or like now in the podcast. And for me at the time I wasn't doing the podcast. I was like why did I stop doing that? Like I loved doing this. And I was thinking about the reasons of why I stopped, which was just because I hated editing and I hated like all the back end bullshit. Part of my French, or not French, part of my profanity. Um, but like that wasn't a good reason to stop doing like what I love to do. That's what I'm trying to say. And I felt that like that book served as a good reminder for me to like to to think that through again. And so yeah, all of this coming back home to saying that I think one like he's an incredible author and researcher in the way that he like creates his uh just structures the books. It's so organized and like it's really like you can tell that this like came through him. This work like really came through him, especially Mastery. I think like the other books are like if you're into like if you want to be able to recognize like power um or like if you want to be a better seducer, like I'm sure those books will help you. But like I think Mastery is like that's the one that's like you want to become a master in what you're doing. You want to be like you want to find your calling and your vocation. Like that's the book to read. And so yeah.
I mean, even from a health perspective, I think that might be the most important thing. Like beyond eating real food and all that stuff is when you wake up excited to do what you're doing or live your life, that can make up for a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think we've all seen millionaires and billionaires that don't look healthy, but they're just full of life and they don't really have any major issues. I think
Yeah.
that life energy kind of carries them, and that makes a
Mm.
big difference.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. When you're saying that, I was thinking of Warren Buffett and like drinking Coca-Cola.
Yeah, Warren Buffett's an interesting one. I feel like he does a lot of that for his investments to make more money, but I think that's also true. He loves what he's doing, and he's very good
Yeah.
at it.
Yeah.
But he's got a quote around that too, like write out the 25 things that you want to do in life, and then pick the top five, and then throw out the other 20 because they'll distract you from the most important things.
Mm.
So that could be another way to break things down. Or you mentioned childhood interest was a common theme amongst people you've interviewed, and I think I saw that from my health coaches and other people. It was like write down what you liked as a child. Like
Yeah.
money's not involved there. What did you just naturally
Yeah.
gravitate to? And almost
Mm.
everybody that has mastery in some area, I feel like it's some form of something they really enjoyed as a child.
Yeah.
It was just kind of rediscovering that as an adult.
Yeah. And I feel like we like our society um, overcomplicates it. And we're always like, what's my purpose? How do I figure it out? Like, what's my purpose? I know I was like that. And it's like at the most fundamental level, it's like in order to be a master at something, like you need to do it a lot and you need to be disciplined about it. And you also need to have a creative aspect around it too. So, which basically just comes down to you have to love it. And yeah, a lot of the times it's something in our childhood. And yeah, so what do you think that was for you? Like if you're looking at it from where you are now and you're relating it to like your childhood, how would you relate that?
I think sports and physical stuff was always my biggest interest from an early childhood. I mean, I started off with golf, but I was always outside. I wasn't a good athlete, but I still enjoyed doing it. And
Yeah.
eventually it turned into weightlifting and nutritional stuff. And then it kind of expanded from there. But it kind of lost my way a little bit later on and then
Mm.
rediscovered it. So I think that was a big one. Um,
Yeah.
Also, just having fun without stress or being able to communicate freely. Like when I post
Mm.
content on social media, even if like five people view it, I feel phenomenal the rest of the day. And
Yeah.
just that lets me know that, oh, this is part of what makes me happy. It's
Mm.
it's just something I like to do. So now that I've had
Yeah.
references of what I enjoy, it's easier to see if this is something I should keep doing or now this isn't really me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like it's so from what you're saying, it's so clear that that's where people either get energy from what they're doing or they it it makes them burn out. It's
Yeah,
like, do you like it? It's as simple as that. Like, yes, like how do you pay the bills? But
right.
like how if you're stuck in that position, which many people are, how can you do that and like maximize doing what you love? How can you pay the bills by maximizing by doing what you love?
Yeah. And I think just becoming a master or becoming one of the best in the world at whatever you choose to do, especially with the internet, there's going to be a way to monetize it.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
from whether you're
Yeah.
selling Pokemon cards or trying to fix somebody's disease or holding space with people, whatever your interest is, there's a community that'll probably pay for it if you're the
Yeah.
best at it.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's a matter of how can you prioritize your love for doing it over your love of or your love for stability or wanting to make money. But yeah,
Yeah,
because like people like the consumer, especially now, like people are one like we should do it because like that's what we want to do, but also like the market doesn't lie, and like if someone is wanting money over like over is if someone's pedestalizing money over their mission, like people can sniff that bullshit out right away. And like look at there's so many people in the media who are like that, and you see people like tear them apart.
yeah. Sometimes you get away with it. Sometimes you do become a millionaire or a billionaire, but then you have two divorces or you're not very happy later on in life. So you might not
Yeah, Yeah,
I think it
Jordan
was.
Peterson has a quote that reminds me of what you just said. And it's like, he's like, I've been a clinician for like 30 years and I've never seen anyone get away with anything ever.
Yeah, at the very least, you're going to recognize it on your deathbed.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a good spot to end. We really came full circle and talking about like just the conversation of coming back to the beginning. So thank you for coming on. And yeah, hope to speak with you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad you're doing the podcast again. So I think this is
Thank you, brother.
something you enjoy and something that you're good at doing. So I hope you keep doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. See you, everyone.